I would like to begin today by assuring you of something that is hopefully not surprising. Namely, this week's reading is the most difficult and the most dry we will have all semester. I really do realize that Kant is harder than whatever they use to sharpen diamond cutters, and drier than a burnt piece of toast left out a week in the Sahara Desert. This said, Kant is at least as important as he is hard and dry. One of my mentors once told me that between Plato and Kant, every possible philosophical problem has been posed, and that every other philosopher is doing nothing more than commenting on them. This might be an exaggeration. Even so, I felt Kant's importance outweighed his tediousness, and so, here we have him. Before diving into the reading for today, I'd like to offer a brief outline of Kant's life. Indeed, any philosopher's writings are but a chapter in, and perhaps only a footnote to, his or her biography. Kant began and ended his life in the Prussian town of Königsberg, a town that is now part of Russia. He was born to Protestant parents in 1724 and died in 1804, in the middle of Prussia's war with the most famous victim of the Napoleon complex, Napoleon. This all happened, if your math is a little rusty, what we call a long time ago. Indeed, while Kant is certainly closer to our contemporary than Plato, he never had the privilege of walking into a Ben Franklin's or streaming a lecture off YouTube. In Kant's time, Ben Franklin was a man rather than a store, and streaming meant little more than paddling up the local river. Kant, in other words, lived in a very different world than our own. Kant also lived in a rather different manner than most of us do. If you have ever seen the show Monk, you can get an idea of what Kant must have appeared like to his fellow Prussians. He woke every morning at 4, drank some tea, prepared and gave lectures, and then sat down to his midday meal. In the afternoon, Kant would read, and then walk up and down the square outside his home precisely 8 times before returning home to eat, write for 4 hours, and retire to bed at 9 p.m. on the dot. Every one of Kant's days looked exactly the same. This, then, gives you some idea of the man who Kant was. Perhaps it makes some sense of why his writing is so dry and meticulous, why it is much closer to a scientific argument than a work of literature, why it is even less exciting than polka night at the local Lutheran church. Lack of excitement in the reading, thus noted. Let's begin. From the opening of chapter 1, Kant is hurling abstract philosophical terms at his readers, in the manner of a Chinese showman throwing knives at his petrified volunteer. Indeed, the book begins with the claim that nothing is good but a good will, or, for our purposes here, good intentions. So why is this? Well, Kant challenges us. Think about the other things we call good. For instance, we call certain characteristics good. It is good to be creative. But, Kant would say, what about serial killers who kill people in creative ways? Not good. Okay, well, what about certain good fortunes, then? Certainly it is always good to be healthy. Not bad, says Kant, but it's not going to fly. Because what about dictators who refuse to die? It's not good that they remain healthy. Okay, Kant, we reply. So maybe good characteristics aren't always good, and maybe good fortunes aren't either. But what about good outcomes? Certainly it's always good when the world becomes a better place. Not so fast, Kant says. Suppose I kick you in the back, trying to hurt you, but end up working out a knot you've had for weeks. The world becomes a better place, but I don't think you'd say that me kicking you was a good action. At this point, we should be frustrated, asking, well, what do you think is actually good then, Kant? By way of reply, Kant poses the following type of situation. Bill and Phil are both trying to save people from a fire. Bill saves 2, Phil saves none. Now, even though only Bill made the world a better place, it seems like both did something good. So what did they have in common? Kant's answer is that both had a good will. Both had their intentions in the right place. This, then, must be what is good without qualification. A good will is always good, no matter what happens in the world. So then, assuming Kant is onto something here, we need to ask, what exactly goes into having a good will? We all know what acting out of good intentions looks like. It's the guy who gives up his seat on the bus for a senior citizen. It's the woman who spends her day off cooking at the local soup kitchen. But how do we describe what these people are doing? What does it mean when we say that they have good intentions? Kant's proposed answer here is a good one, so good in fact that it has yet to disappear from philosophy classes. His answer is that when someone acts out of a good will, what they are doing is acting according to duty, for the sake of duty. Using this type of description, however, sounds rather like Kant poured some philosophy terms in a blender and poured them into his book. So let's use an example to make this idea of duty for duty's sake clearer. Let's take the woman helping out in the soup kitchen. Perhaps her motivation is this. I help out because it makes the world a better place. In this case, the motive behind the woman's action depends upon the world actually becoming a better place through the action. But let's say every person who shows up to the soup kitchen is not really all that needy and just grabbing a free meal. In this case, the woman's motivation for helping falls apart. She is not making the world a better place. But clearly, the woman still has good intentions. She's still doing something good. So what kind of motivation could be behind these intentions that doesn't fall apart so easily when the things in the world change? Let's say it is this. I help out because it is my duty to do so. This is a sort of Good Samaritan's version of the famous John Wayne quote, "A man's gotta do what a man's gotta do." The reason to help out stands all by itself. No outside circumstances can change it. The motive is immobile. This motivation from duty does indeed seem more like what we are getting at when we say that the woman has a good will. Having thus pinned down duty as at the root of our good intentions, Kant must answer this. How do we figure out our duty in a specific situation? Well, Kant begins, first things first. Before anything, we've got to remember that duty has nothing to do with our specific situations or anything to do with what happens. A duty is a duty. When someone does something good, all that matters is that the person's intentions are good and based on duty. To eliminate specifics and consequences, then, what we should do, Kant suggests, is act as if our decision applies to all people, in all situations, at all times. We should ask, in other words, can I really agree that the intention behind my action here should be applied to all people and at all times? This is confusing again, so let's look at another example. Say I'm 16 years old and a lottery official comes to my door. All I have to do to win the jackpot is lie and tell the guy that I'm 18 years old. Now, I know what I would do personally. I would lie, telling myself something like, well, it's okay to lie when the outcomes are really desirable. But at this point, Kant steps in and asks me, now, can you really agree that this should be a rule for every person at all times? In other words, can you agree that it's always okay for people to lie when outcomes are really desirable? Kant thinks that a reasonable person has to answer no to this, that telling the truth at all times is thus our duty. Having thus established that a good will is acting from duty, and having established what exactly this duty is, Kant must answer, what's in it for us? Why should I miss out on the jackpot? His answer is extremely interesting, and I personally think it works, although it does take a little while to sink in. Namely, Kant says that when we act with a good will by doing our duty, we are acting in a purely reasonable manner. Now, since we are at base reasonable beings, when we act purely reasonably, we are being completely ourselves. We are fulfilled most fully when we act according to our duties. This brings us to the end of Kant's argument. I can't claim that I understand all of it, and I certainly don't expect you to. This said, I hope I have helped you grasp a little of what is going on in this great philosopher's writing on ethics. My summary thus ended, I would like to conclude with a summary of the summary, offering you the main Kantian morsel I hope remains with you. This is the heart of Kant, the main idea that may be able to help you, if not in making ethical decisions, then at least in impressing friends at cocktail parties. Here it is then. Pay attention. Kant believes that the consequences of our actions do not make a difference on the goodness of an action. This is because the only thing that can be good in and of itself is a good will. Ethics thus deals with intentions behind our actions. Good intentions are those motivated by duty. Our duty, in turn, is acting in a way that our reason for action could be applied to everyone.